Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this sort of video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, of course, that I'm going to review by that of a DontaesBoxingNation. And in this video, of course, recently the Gervonta Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach Jr. pay-per-view numbers have recently just came in. And of course, they're okay, but not necessarily anything great, which is pretty much exactly what I had predicted because no one was really asking for this fight. Now, what's very particularly interesting, of course, is that DontaesBoxingNation, the video that I'm about to review today, of course, he's going to try to put the best possible spin on this as possible. He's going to try to make Gervonta Tank Davis come out smelling like a rose, as what he regularly does with his favorite black fighters, while at the same time bitching and moaning about racial double standards towards black fighters. And once again, I've already stated this. There are plenty of racial double standards or unfair criticisms, quote unquote, against that of certain black fighters. But DontaesBoxingNation is one of those channels that, in my view, does really more harm than good in terms of talking about a lot of these topics because DontaesBoxingNation is one of these guys to where when he brings up quote unquote claims of racism or claims of double standards, first of all, not only does he bring up a certain amount of double standards, if not even worse standards than some of the quote unquote racists or other people out there that are talking about boxing, but on top of that, DontaesBoxingNation, he's a guy to where a lot of the claims of quote unquote racism or double standards, they're really not relevant. Dante is one of these guys to where he's pretty much never happy with anything and he's pretty much just a constant bitcher and a constant complainer. It just is what it is. And he's always going to be that guy. It's pretty much what he has been the whole entire time with his platform on that of the YouTube channel, which is why I say that you got to be very careful with the channel like a DontaesBoxingNation or an Aki TV. Now, of course, what Dante and what Ego and what some of these other guys are going to try to do is that they're going to try to put the most positive spin on this fight as much as possible. Because heading into this fight, the reason why this fight only did about 260,000 pay-per-view buys, which was even a little bit better than what it was originally supposed to do, which is very telling that a fight that allegedly, one of the bigger faces of boxing in Gervonta Tank Davis, and he is one of the bigger faces, but someone that the LDBC and new media, let's be real, the pro-black cult, it just is what it is. The guys overall, that have been trying to allege that Gervonta Tank Davis has now overtaken Canelo or overtaken as the main face of boxing. Gervonta has not been super impressive with his most recent pay-per-view numbers. Canelo Alvarez in his last two fights against both Munguia and Edgar Berlanga did about 500 to 600,000 pay-per-view buys in both of those fights individually. So at the end of the day, that's why I keep saying that Canelo Alvarez, at least at the current moment in time, that he still is the main face of boxing, and it's really not that close. It just is what it is. Now, of course, that wouldn't really be a big deal, but DontaesBoxingNation and Boxing Eagle, what these guys always love to claim is that, when people talk about Gervonta Tank Davis's numbers and other black boxers' numbers, that, oh, you're pocket watching or why you worrying about another man's earnings and all sort of stuff. Well, you can't talk all this shit about how Canelo Alvarez is doing poor numbers because he's fighting fighters that apparently nobody wants to see. And I agree with that to a degree, at least with Edgar Berlanga, and of course he didn't take the David Benavidez fight. But I mean, the thing is that Canelo is still doing great numbers. So now they're trying to do a twist on it and basically state that, oh, well, Gervonta Tank Davis, he's debatably the face of boxing right up there with Canelo Alvarez. No, it's really not that debatable. And this is why I've been saying for years that Canelo will not be officially knocked off until we see consistent numbers. You can't just have one great performance in a fight against Ryan Garcia, in that fight that was built for several years. That was basically Gervonta Tank Davis's version of Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. There wasn't going to be a fight that was going to be any bigger than that for him, at least publicity wise. It just is what it is. But anyways, continuing onwards, of course, heading into this fight against Lamont Roach Jr., which is a fight that basically nobody wanted and then nobody asked for. Once again, had this been Canelo Alvarez or Usyk or one of the fighters that, let's be real, would have not been a black American fighter or a black fighter that Dante was heavily pushing, they would have absolutely grilled them because Gervonta Tank Davis heading into this fight, he was bringing a fighter up in weight. a guy that had 10 total knockouts within like 20 something wins. And on top of that, like 25 wins. On top of that, he was a guy that lost to Jamel Herring, a guy that Shakur Stevenson pieced up, a guy that has never been looked at as an A-grade level fighter. He lost to Jamel Herring not too long ago. A guy to where, his biggest fight of his career was against Stevenson, and he got absolutely beat down and knocked out by Stevenson, which is very telling because Stevenson is not a power puncher. He is not a guy that usually stops opponents. So what does that really tell you? So Lamont Roach was heading into this fight a champion at 130, not even at 135, a guy that was not looked at as a great puncher. We seen Gervonta Tank Davis, stunned multiple times in the fight, hurt and rocked multiple times in the fight. We seen what probably should have been a knockdown. We seen him allegedly try to bite that of a Lamont Roach Jr. We also seen other things, low blows, him shouldering Lamont Roach Jr. in the face. But DontaesBoxingNation is still trying to put a positive spin on this. Remember when Tyson Fury beat the shit out of Deontay Wilder, and these guys had all these allegations about how Tyson Fury was this quote-unquote big cheater and how he was the biggest cheater of all time, and they were working so hard every day to make it look like Tyson Fury was cheating his whole entire career, basically to tear down his reputation. Where is this for Gervonta Tank Davis? Because Gervonta Tank Davis took a knee in the middle of the fight. He tried to bite Lamont Roach Jr., at least apparently that's what it looked like on the footage. And then on top of that, he shouldered him right in the face. So how come Gervonta Tank Davis is not remembered as the dirtiest fighter of all time, or this is known as a cherry pick gone wrong, but with Canelo Alvarez or a Fury or someone like that, it is. I keep telling people this for a very long time, and anyone with a brain cell, it's very obvious, what Dante is up to. But that's why I say this dude is the biggest hypocrite and the biggest snake in all of boxing talk. It just is what it is. But anyways, let's see what Dante's Boxing Nation has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So, according to Dan Raphael, the pay-per-view numbers are in for Gervonta Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach. The fight did 260,000 pay-per-view buys, which is around what I expected them to be. I even expected the numbers to be a little bit lower than that because, once again, no one had really knew about Lamont Roach. Remember, originally, Gervonta was supposed to fight Lomachenko, which would have been a massive success. But Lomachenko, he turned down the fight. Lamont Roach was the only one that was willing to step in and take...
Lomachenko definitely did turn down the fight, and Lomachenko is going to have to be remembered for that. But the interesting thing that these guys won't mention is that when Lomachenko was at his absolute peak, Lomachenko had actually called out Gervonta Tank Davis multiple times. And Gervonta Tank Davis, every time Lomachenko was brought up around him, he would get very annoyed or angry. And that's how you can tell that a fighter is scared to death of that particular fighter. Whenever their name gets mentioned around them and they get very jittery or very jumbled with their words, or all of a sudden they get very pissed off and annoyed, both Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia, they were afraid to death of Lomachenko. Like DontaesBoxingNation and these other guys, they keep trying to spin this narrative about how Lomachenko, overall turned down the Mikey fight and that he ducked Mikey Garcia. He didn't duck Mikey Garcia. He turned down the fight because he just previously had a torn shoulder injury. He was coming off of a performance to where it was very clear that, he was compromised because he was coming off of the shoulder injury. He said, I'm not ready for Mikey Garcia yet. Mikey knew damn well that he could slither out of that weight class. He moved all the way up to 147 because he knew that if he did have to fight Lomachenko, and if he got his ass whooped, that he would have an excuse. Just like what Kilbrook did against Errol Spence if he were to fight GGG. That's what a lot of these fighters, when they move up 2 weight classes, that's what they do. So both Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia, they were avoiding Vasily Lomachenko several years ago when Lomachenko was really looked at the peak of his career. But these guys, of course, are never going to mention that because they hated Lomachenko with a burning passion. Because, of course, he was a Caucasian fighter that was debated at the time, not only as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter during his heyday, but on top of that, as one of the greatest fighters of all time, which, of course, they took high offense to. And I get it to a certain degree. Lomachenko in that realm, in terms of being on the Mayweather level or the Pacquiao level, of course, he was being overrated in that regard. Absolutely. but they go too far with it, and they take it from that level, and they basically want to go all the way to the other spectrum and say that Lomachenko never deserved to be #1 pound for pound in the first place. It was Crawford all along, and the reason why they never wanted him there was because he was a black fighter. All that is horse shit. But Dante's Boxing Nation, once again, he's a guy that is a humongous snake, and he's a guy overall, once again, that feeds a lot of misinformation. All his narratives, all his quote-unquote facts, they're all racially motivated, every single one of them.
Challenge. There were other fighters with bigger names that was offered the Gervonta Tank Davis fight, but they turned it down. Now we're getting reports that Davis versus Roach 2 is in serious negotiations, and if that...
And isn't it interesting how when Canelo Alvarez apparently was interested in fighting Jermall Charlo a couple of years ago, what was Dante's Boxing Nation saying right after Jermall Charlo had beat Juan Macias Montiel in a not so impressive performance? He said that, oh, well, Canelo only takes fights against guys that are coming off of not so good performances. Where is this same energy when Gervonta Tank Davis fought Frank Martin? Did he not fight Frank Martin, not coming off of the most impressive performance against that one Armenian fighter? You know, where is this same thing when it comes to, overall, him fighting other fighters? He fought a guy in Lamont Roach that was moving up one weight class when Canelo Alvarez was planning to beat, or planning to fight Jermall Charlo, overall, and move him up from 160. All we heard about from these pro-blackity black channels was that overall that, oh, well, Canelo, I'm not a big fan of him moving up a fighter one weight class. But then all of a sudden with this fight, it's not a big deal. Why?
Comes to fruition, that fight without a doubt is going to be more successful. It's pretty crazy when you think about the fact that while no one really knew who Lamont Roach was and no one knew what he was capable of doing, behind the scenes, Davis, he knew that this was a more dangerous fight. Davis felt that this fight...
You see how Dante is trying to put a spin on that? He knew that this was a more dangerous fight. Once again, if this were Canelo Alvarez or Alexander Usyk, Dante would be going all day long about how this was a cherry pick gone wrong. No way. I'm sorry, but no. There's not much of a positive spin for Gervonta Tank Davis on this. At the end of the day, he looked like shit. He tried several dirty tactics within this fight. He's a very talented fighter and a very gifted fighter, but at the end of the day, listen, just to be blunt and objective about it, it was not his most impressive performance. And we hear once again, we hear all the criticisms for Canelo Alvarez, for apparently, oh, well, he's getting outboxed by Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, which is bullshit anyway. But I mean, he says all this stuff about, Canelo, oh, he needs to knock out to win. Where's this about Gervonta Tank Davis? Because he was not winning that fight against Frank Martin before he got the knockout. I'm not even quite sure if he was 100% winning the fight against Rolly Romero before he got the knockout. But then apparently all that is just brushed under the rug with Gervonta Tank Davis. So once again, Dante's Boxing Nation, he loves to preach all this bullshit about how much black fighters have to go through. Dante is one of the biggest racists, if not the biggest racist commentator out there about boxing. He is one of the most racially motivated dudes in all the boxing talk, if not the most racially motivated. Every video that he has is always completely racially motivated in his bias agenda.
Was even more dangerous than a Lomachenko fight. Remember, guys, originally Gervonta was supposed to fight in November.
Right, now remember, the Lamont Roach fight, a guy that was moving up a weight class, a guy that really had no big wins in his career other than a Hector Garcia, a guy that had just lost to Gervonta Tank Davis by knockout. And it's not like Hector Garcia was ever an A-grade level fighter anyway. A guy that had, like a 35% knockout ratio throughout his whole entire career. I mean, like, whatever 10 divided by 25 is, when it comes down to it. A guy that really was not looked at as a main power puncher. A guy that had just lost to Jamel Herring about 5 fights ago. A guy that Shakur Stevenson was even able to stop. Like, are you fucking serious? Give me a break.
November of last year, but he ended up negotiating with Lamont Roach for so long, they ended up pushing the fight to March, and Gervonta demanded a rematch clause, which also suggests...
Now, the interesting thing would be is that if Dante really wants to put his money where his mouth is, overall about Lamont Roach Jr. really being this quote-unquote A-grade level fighter, put him in the ring against guys like Shakur Stevenson and Lomachenko and Keyshawn Davis and see how well he does. I bet you money that he doesn't win any of those fights. And that's not me saying that Lamont Roach Jr. is not a very decent fighter. But there are fighters like this all the time. They end up winning or having a very good performance one time in their career against an exceptional or a great level fighter, and we never hear from them again. George Kambosos against Teofimo Lopez. Buster Douglas against Mike Tyson. Andrew Ruiz somewhat against AJ Anthony Joshua to a degree. Because of course he was able to beat Luis Ortiz and, some other contenders as well. Ricardo Mayorga against Vernon Forrest. Jeff Horn against Manny Pacquiao. Now, do I think that Lamont Roach is more talented than some of those guys, say like a Jeff Horn? Yeah, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it's not like he's this world beater. So let's just cut the shit.
He wanted more money because he knew how dangerous of a fight this was, even though fans didn't know. But now the whole boxing world knows. And for the
right, and that's what Dante's Boxing Nation is trying to like, oh, the world didn't know how dangerous of a fight this was. Overall, but Lamont, Gervonta Tank Davis knew it was dangerous all along. We just didn't see it. Right, well, every fight is dangerous. But at the end of the day, the truth of the matter is that this fight was not supposed to be this challenging. You were supposed to stop this dude, at a maximum or a minimum within like about 9 rounds. And you have a draw against this dude. And honestly, a fight to where, to be quite honest with you, I thought that Gervonta had just lost. But I mean, if you had it going either way or a draw, I could understand it. Because it's not like Lamont Roach clearly won the fight in my personal view. But at the end of the day, once again, let's just cut the crap. Like this is not one of those fights overall to where it's like, oh, well, overall, a lot of people didn't really know how dangerous Lamont Roach was. Because Lamont Roach on paper was not really supposed to be that dangerous. He's just not. He's a very good fighter. He's not a great one.
First time Gervonta Tank Davis will go into a fight where we know that his opponent can match him punch for punch, feint for feint, and skill for skill. People...
Right, but what does that really say about Gervonta Tank Davis? That you're saying that the opponent overall, and notice that Dante's Boxing Nation also stated this, that he said that for the first time in Gervonta Tank Davis's career, I keep telling people this, people know that Gervonta Tank Davis's resume ain't shit. Dante's Boxing Nation overall can give you all this crap. Dante always loves to give you all this shit about how Gervonta Tank Davis, oh, he fights some of the toughest styles in all of boxing. Dante knows that the fighters that he's fighting ain't shit. Isaac Pitbull Cruz is not an A-grade level fighter. Mario Barrios and Rolly Romero are not A-grade level fighters. All right, it just is what it is. The only 2 A-grade level wins in his career are Ryan Garcia and Frank Martin. That's it. That's all there is. And even in those 2 fights, they were not even completely confirmed champions. They've never won official belts before. So, I mean, it just is what it is. But, it's just interesting how these guys will try to spin something around and try to make overall, a dog turd into a piece of gold, in order to just appease their narrative.
Tried to make a big deal of Lamont Roach moving up in weight, to discredit Gervonta Tank Davis. But the thing is...
Right, well, that's the same shit you were doing with Canelo Alvarez when Jamal Charlo was about to move on one weight class. So why not with Gervonta Tank Davis, Mr. Dante? Is it because Gervonta Tank Davis is one of your favorite black fighters and you want to protect him and put him in a positive light, and try to tear down fighters like Canelo and Usyk, in the media? Once again, Dante always loves to talk about double standards. I've never seen a boxing commentator have as much double standards and racial bias as a Dante's Boxing Nation, other than Aki TV.
As Lamont, he only moved up one weight class. I mean, that's like Shakur moving up from 130 to 135. Crawford, he moved up from 130 to 147, and he knocked out every single welterweight that he was in a ring with.
Right, but he didn't just move it up overall, just one, just 2 weight classes. So why the fuck would you even comment that? Terrence Bud Crawford went from 135 to 140, then to 147. And yes, he knocked out every welterweight that he was in the ring with, which is relatively impressive. 90% of those guys were also bums. It just is what it is. And I know that a lot of people are not going to like that. All right, the welterweights that Crawford fought were guys like Jeff Horn, Aegis Kavalaskas, Jose Benavidez, David Avanezian, Awash Kelbrook, Awash Demir Khan, guys that really didn't have any goddamn chance in the first place. Is what it is, all right? The only 2 fighters that he fought that were worth a damn were Errol Spence and Sean Porter, and I give him a great amount of credit for those wins. But let's cut the crap about, him knocking everybody out there. Like, did these guys talk about Gennady Golovkin, for example? When Golovkin knocked at everybody at the middleweight division, all they talk about is how overrated Gennady Golovkin's knockout ratio is and how overrated his record is, right? But then, you'll end up, glazing Terrence Bud Crawford's resume. Like, no offense, dude, But Terrence Bud Crawford, even though I would say that he has a better resume than, say, a Golovkin's overall, it's not like Crawford has this fantastic resume. So this dude, Dante, he's willing to lie through his teeth, overall, basically to get whatever narrative he needs to across.
Obvious reasons, some of these race fans, they tried to discredit Gervonta for fighting a champion who moved up from 130 to 135. The double...
Right, a champion, a guy that really, really is not someone that was looked at as an A-grade level fighter. Someone that beat a Hector Garcia, another fighter that no one really gave a shit to see Gervonta Tank Davis fight. That's the biggest win in his career. And a guy that doesn't have a great amount of power, a guy that already lost to Jamel Herring. So, cut the crap.
Standards are amazing when you really think about it, because when Shakur moved from 126 to 130, old media, they said that Shakur was the bigger man fighting against Oscar Valdez, who had already been at 30 for quite some time. And they said that because they knew Shakur Stevenson was going to win the fight.
Well, that's a part of it, Dante, but if we're also going to be real, Shakur Stevenson is naturally bigger than Oscar Valdez. It just is what it is. When you take a look at them in the ring, he's taller, he's lengthier, he's heavier. It just is what it is. Now, even if they were the same size, would I predict someone like an Oscar Valdez to beat Shakur Stevenson? No, I would not, because I think that the skill set is not even relatively close. But the thing is that when you talk about it, dude, Oscar Valdez is like, what, 5'4"? Like, give me a fucking break.
Despite him moving up in weight. So they had to make excuses for Oscar Valdez losing to Shakur before the fight even happened. I remember Marcos from Fight Hub. He kept telling Shakur Stevenson the week of the fight that he was bigger than Oscar Valdez. And ESPN's commentators did the same thing. These are also the same fans that made excuses for Canelo Alvarez losing to Floyd Mayweather when he was 15 to 20 pounds bigger than him. We know what time it is. With that being said, I'm going to wrap this video up. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
And once again, Dante, is doing his regular race baiting. But once again, it's just very particularly interesting because when Canelo moved up Jamel Charlo, although, of course, he moved them up 2 weight classes, but they're pretty much very similar in size. All he was talking about is the only reason why Canelo won was because of the size advantage. All this bullshit. But, all this other stuff. Crawford moves up 1 weight class. He's at a massive size disadvantage. Like, give me a fucking break. Is what it is. Anyway, so once again, Dante just pulls anything out of his ass, that he needs to. Like I said, imagine if this were Canelo Alvarez or Usyk. Imagine if they were fighting a fighter that had, like, what, a 35% knockout ratio? A guy that had lost to a guy that, was not known to be an elite level fighter just 5 fights ago, and then on top of that, he was moving up a weight class. We never hear the end of it. So cut the crap. It is what it is. I'm not going to 100% say that this was a cherry pick gone wrong because, of course, offers were offered to Lomachenko and he turned it down. And, Shakur, I'm not really exactly sure what happened with that. So I get it. There was, limited options to a degree. But at the end of the day, let's not sit here and act like Lamont Roach Jr., that he was just this world beater heading into this fight and that no one just seen the potential in him all along. And that's the reason why this fight was so tough. No, the reason why this fight was so tough is because Gervonta Tank Davis' skill set got highly exposed within this fight, period, is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. I just wanted to talk about that because Gervonta is a phenomenal fighter. But let's keep a buck. This is not some fight, overall to where it's an example of, oh, well, people just didn't know who this guy was. He was always highly skilled. It's just that, heading into this fight, you guys heavily underestimated him. The odds were stacked against Lamont Roach Jr. within a multitude of reasons. And with the standards of Gervonta Tank Davis, he was never supposed to have this amount of problems in the first place. I mean, at least when it comes to Canelo versus Bivol, first of all, not only was Canelo definitely smaller than Bivol because he's not a natural light heavyweight, but even though, of course, he tried to balloon up and wait for that fight, which was a massive mistake. But on top of that, Bivol was undefeated and known as one of the more elite light heavyweights of his day. And then, of course, right now, he's the best light heavyweight in the world. So, I mean, at least we can kind of say that with Canelo and Dimitri Bivol. There are examples of fighters that end up losing a fight against a guy that people just don't know because they're very particularly dangerous, but you may not know that guy. This is not really one of those examples. I mean, to a degree it is, because, of course, Lamont put on a good showing, but in all honesty, it's not like Lamont Roach was ever looked at as the creme de la creme, but that people just really didn't pay attention to him like a Dimitri Bivol. It's not that example. This is almost kind of like a cherry pick gone wrong. This was not supposed to be anywhere near as challenging as what it was. And it was, is what it is. So Gervonta's going to have to deal with it. If you want to count him as one of the top fighters in the world, Dante's Boxing Nation, you can't overall just make him come out smelling like a rose whenever he has a shitty performance, but and then call him debatably a top 5 pound for pound fighter. But then when it comes to other fighters like Canelo or Usyk, when they have a criticizing performance, you don't treat them the same whatsoever, and you want to criticize them with the utmost high of standards. And that's how you know Dante's Boxing Nation, he doesn't even truly believe that Gervonta or Terrence Bud Crawford right now are the number 1 pound for pound fighters, because he doesn't hold them with the same standard whatsoever. But it is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.